Hi, this is John Wren, and this is the Startup Show. We're here each Friday at 10 a.m. Mountain Time to talk about startups, sponsored by the Small Business Chamber of Commerce, Inc., Colorado nonprofit corporation that masks the fact that this is pretty much just me. We have a big online presence. Our Facebook page is very active. We like people to come and introduce themselves on it, and we are using it as an umbrella for several different activities. And one of the things that we're spinning off from it, and I say we in the imperial sense, I'm talking about myself. I mean, it's incredible what one person can do now with the tools that we have available. But we're spinning off Wren College, and we're going to be talking about the Wren College method. It's the Wren College of Adult True Self in the sense of your innermost core being, not the self that's part of selfishness, but the self that's part. So it's a bit metaphysical, but the true self-directed learning, College of True Self-Directed Learning. And we're encouraging people to form groups based on what Ben Franklin did with his friends back in 1727. If you want to know how to do that, just Google how to start a Franklin Circle. A wiki comes up and tells you pretty much everything I know about it. And I'll help you, though. Sometimes the knowing and the doing are two different things. So the method that we're going to be talking about employs 4 practices. The first practice is recovery. How do you get back up on your feet after you've been knocked down? Most successful businesses come after somebody's been knocked down. There's some sort of a setback. And this can be caused by many different things, but recovery is the first practice. Now, this is not exactly linear. You may be doing the first practice for you, maybe the next one, the startup practice. How do you go from an idea to your first customer? Then the practice of growth. You know, once you've found a customer, you've sort of found your direction. Routine makes genius commonplace, and this is where the techniques of traditional management come in until things change and things start to decline. And then you need to repeat the process. So you may start up as a way to continue growing. And finally, flourishing. If you've started, you're growing, but you're not flourishing, it may be necessary to go back to the recovery step. Something, you know, there are a lot of people that make lots of money but are very unhappy. So if you're, what is flourishing? Martin Seligman, who I think is the one that popularized the term with his most recent book called Flourishing. Martin Seligman, president of the American Psychological Association, he talked about flourishing being comprised of 5 components: a positive affect, you're happy. So are you happy? Engaged? Are you doing work that you get lost in? That Chetzaminga's concept of flow or engagement. Relationships. How is it between you and the people around you? Customers and employees and investors, of course, but also friends and family. Are you benefiting from your relationships, or the people that are in relationship with you experiencing you as a helpful source of their life? And meaning, do you see a big picture? And more, it's becoming clear that if there's not some sort of a big picture, we just don't do very well. And I'm going to talk about graduation talks in just a minute. And that was the thing that we heard over and over this year. You've got to find a set of values that you can live by. And then A is accomplishment, whether it's to become a champion bridge player or to do whatever it is in your life. Are you accomplishing what you set out to do? And that's definitely part of it. If we just look at the first, you know, the happiness, the feeling good, it's not nearly enough. There are these other 4 aspects also. So those are the the practices that we'll be talking about. Today we're going to talk about recovery, and especially the part of recovery that I think is in some ways a shortcut to powerful recovery, and that is meditation. Now, I'm going to talk about my experience, some of the resources that are available. Do you meditate right now? If you do, then you might have some ideas for us that you'll want to post as comments. And if you want to be on the show and talk about any of these practices, I'd love to have you as a guest on the show. You do it from in front of your own computer with a webcam, and we do it at 10 o'clock Mountain Time, the same time, each Friday morning, and we'll have you on the show live, or I can do it at the time that works better for you, and then we'll use it as a recording. We're going to be doing more of those special editions. So if you are interested in being a guest on the show, call me 303-861-1447. That's 303-861-1447. Well, today we're going to be talking about meditation, but first, a couple of things that are coming up that I want to make sure you know about. Each Friday afternoon, we have a live face-to-face Idea Cafe startup workshop and Praxis Incubator. It's a meetup.com group. You can find it in RSVP. Most don't RSVP. It's fine. Just walk-ins are welcome. It's a Panera Bread Cafe, 13th and Grant, just a block from the Capitol. And we hope that people will come to that sort of model group, like it so much that they'll go and start one on their own in cooperation with their local Chamber of Commerce. And if you'd like our help in doing that, we'd be glad to help you. The Praxis Incubator is a new aspect. Praxis is thought and action. Is a term that's been popular at one time. It was suppressed. It's becoming popular again, I believe. We'll see what happens. I haven't done an egram analysis of the word praxis, but I bet that's what it would show, is this up and down, and now maybe going up again in the usage of the word. Practice is a lot like practice. You have a law practice, a consulting practice, a barber has a practice of cutting hair, but praxis is sort of that kind of a practice, but with teeth. That it is really in a sort of an industrial strength, hardcore way, taking a look at what is my purpose in this world and what can I do right now to move towards that. The book Just Start, Harvard Business Review Press, is the startup book that I recommend right now. And they don't use the word praxis at all. They sort of look at the individual taking action on their own. But I just have a hunch Len and Charlie would both agree if we would discuss it with them, and I haven't yet on practice. I've discussed a lot of other things with them, but not this. But I think they would agree that there is some sort of a gathering and a finding of a source text and an agreement, and then action that comes out of that thought process. Babson College, where Len was president when he wrote the book, entrepreneurial thought and action. That's very much the concept of praxis. And it's very much in keeping with these Franklin circles. Again, if you just Google how to start a Franklin circle, it will come up. And if you gather with your friends on a regular basis with a certain sort of a structure so it doesn't become toxic, it's amazing what can come out of these little groups. Margaret Mead said, "Don't ever think that a small group can't change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has," she said. And I think that's still true today. What we need is not some big mass movement. We need masses that are moving. And I think praxis is the best way to make that happen. I say my purpose is to try to strengthen the grassroots in business and in politics so that we can get back to being the nation of shopkeepers that are involved as we were with the founders. And we're going through some technological changes now that I think makes that more possible than ever before. We have these incredibly powerful tools at our disposal, and one person can do way more than we think they can. My friend Fred wrote a book called The Power of One in America, and that was a long time ago when a photocopier was about our most powerful communication tool. Well, things have changed. I'm hoping Fred updates his book, because I think there are these tools available now that make that even more of a possibility. Well, meditation, I want to talk about that today. It's on my mind because I'm going to a class on meditation. It's each Thursday night for 3 weeks. We had our second session last night. We gather and hear a variety of meditation techniques, and it's kind of laid out as a smorgasbord, and we pick and choose. Well, this is not the first time I've ever looked into meditation. I have gone to classes on meditation ever since back in the 60s. I went to a class in transcendental meditation. The Maharishi from India, the Beatles made him famous. I guess he was pretty famous before that, but the Beatles put him in Life magazine, that's for sure. And it was held out as not having any conflict with any set of religious beliefs, that it was just this practical method that you could use. But yeah, it really was in keeping with the Eastern tradition of meditation. There's the Asian tradition, and there's also the Christian tradition. It goes back to the Desert Fathers. John Main went back and researched. He had been initiated into transcendental meditation and became very interested in it. And then it was he was instructed by a spiritual advisor to set it aside. And he thought that was a good thing, because probably if he hadn't set it aside, he could have never done what he did later, which was to go back and really research Christian centering prayer. And he has developed a worldwide movement that it really, in a lot of ways, is parallel with transcendental meditation, which is still around. But that's the Asian approach. So there's the Christian approach. And then there's a third approach, which a guy named Benson, with a book called Relaxation Response, popularized. And it's strictly a secular approach to meditation. And in a way, they're all three the same technique, just using a little bit different terms. Now, the TM, the Asian approach, and the Asian, the TM is a very mild, it's a westernized version of there's a whole realm of Eastern meditation that I really know absolutely nothing about. And but through yoga, through many other sources, it's being brought over with our Buddhist and to a certain extent Hindu friends. They have established centers all over the world. And when I took transcendental meditation in the 60s, really none of this was going on, at least not in a way that I was aware of. And one of the objections, one of the questions I had for TM when I went to my very first information session was, well, if this is so popular and powerful in other countries, why don't we see more varieties of it here in this country? And sure enough, that's exactly what has happened. There are all kinds. If you Google meditation, it is phenomenal how many things come up. And there's been this blending now of the Eastern approach and the more Western approach. Tony D'Souza, Discovering Awareness, is a book that summarizes what happens in the work that he does individually. I've had great benefit of hearing him give talks. I've gone to retreats with him. And Tony D'Souza is very much in the Christian tradition. He's a Jesuit priest, but he also knows a lot about the East. He is from India. He studied with Anthony de Mello. And de Mello was another high point in my learning about meditation. I'd done the TM and had kind of gotten away from it. And I was at some sort of a meeting, and this little old lady who I've never seen again came over to me, gave me a plastic shopping bag filled with cassette tapes, and said, "Here, you need to listen to these." And as I recall, the tapes were numbered, but I thought, well, I'm not going to just listen. But I didn't throw them away. I kept them around. And then one Saturday morning, I remember where I was, but I can't remember why I was so down in the dumps, but I was, and those tapes were there. And I thought, well, I'm just going to listen to this. And I listened straight through. It was a weekend retreat done by Anthony de Mello. And it really captured my imagination. And this was one of the center points of his weekend workshop, which was recorded and which I sort of did via the cassette tapes, was meditation. It is so powerful. But Anthony Mello, Tony D'Souza, they have sort of blended the Christian and that Eastern tradition. So in the Eastern tradition, it's an emptying. You have a mantra, you just let your mind empty, and there is some word in TM, you're initiated, and you give your instructor a flower, and they give you, by whispering it in your ear, this word that you're supposed to never share with anyone else. And it's kind of got, they say, well, this is not religion, but it sure has trappings of religion around it. And my mother had a cousin that got very, very much into transcendental meditation, had the Maharishi to his home several times, and then was part of this Fairfield, Iowa community that I believe is still there. And so the Eastern has its own form of mysticism that even, say, the TM is influenced heavily by, it looks like to me. But it's a technique of emptying. The Christian centering prayer has a similar technique, but the metaphysics behind it is different. It's allowing the Holy Spirit to fill me. And in a way, I think they're identical, really. They're just using sort of different words to talk about the same concept. And the Christian centering prayer is really what I practice, except when I'm mad at the church, I suppose, and then I may be practicing more just the secular approach. Benson's approach, Dr. Benson, the relaxation response, doesn't look at emptying, doesn't look at filling with the Spirit. He just looks at the physiological benefit of taking some word. Now, in Christian centering prayer, the word is often Jesus, or it can be a phrase that, or Maranatha. But these aren't secret words. They share them with each other. You can pick one out each day from a Bible reading. The advantage of the TM approach is that the word doesn't seem to get in the way quite so much. It becomes almost like a lesson in theology when you're doing a Bible reading, picking a word. Lectio Divina, the Jesuits use, which is a little bit different. It's taking a Bible verse and imagining yourself into the scene. It's very powerful, but it really is profoundly different than centering prayer. And that's what we're talking about here today. Centering prayer, Christian centering prayer, practiced by the Desert Fathers, handed down, and all these techniques until very, very recently, you only learned about them from a master, a guru, someone that was working with you individually. Now there are all kinds of things. If you Google, there's recordings, things written, and I believe all three types are very, very similar. It's just a little bit different metaphysics, a little bit different terminology behind them. But Benson thought, just take anything like one, and you repeat that, one, and you let your mind just focus on that. When your mind starts to drift, you gently bring it back. Don't get mad at yourself. One, and you sit quietly, maybe in the beginning for 5 minutes, Benson says, and then lengthen that to maybe 15 minutes, he says. 20 minutes seems to be the recommended dosage with Christian centering prayer, and with TM, at least in the beginning stages when I was learning about it. I think they have advanced stages where that may change with transcendental meditation. And so I'm going to this class, and it's reminded me of all this, and I've been looking for some way to share about meditation in a way that is helpful. And the class is giving me a little bit of courage to do that. So I thought I'd give it a try today. I'm going to see if my class members might look at this and critique it, and then I'll be doing a redo. I might talk about meditation once a month on a regular basis. We'll see how that works out. We're also going to talk about it at the Root and Branch meeting that we have each Monday, 5:30, 1311 York Street. And it really is a focus on the 12 steps as applied to anything at all in your life. It's an open meeting. Anyone's welcome to come, and it's wide open. Anyone's welcome to come, and anyone is welcome to also share along with the other people. So that's each Monday, 5:30, 1311 York Street. And we'd love to have you there for Root and Branch on Mondays. And that's where I may start talking about meditation once a month, in addition to doing it here online once a month, because it is a powerful technique, and I drift away from it. I'll stop doing it and then remember it and come back to it. And there now is even physiological proof the medical community has that this is having a real effect with the brain scans that they can do, and they can actually see the effect. The claim is that if you meditate twice a day for 20 minutes in something like 90 days, it will restructure your brain. We used to think brain cells were static, but that's becoming more and more clear that that's just not the case. And now the meditation alone may not be enough. If you just can't sit still, there may be some other things that are necessary to get you to the point that you can meditate. And none of this would be in any way competitive with medical help. Let's say you have a thyroid problem, your body's not producing enough thyroid, you probably won't be able to meditate, but your doctor can quickly identify that. There are just all kinds of physical conditions that the medical community can treat. So if you have an inability to meditate, to me, that's a good, red light on the dashboard of your soul, that it's time to go into the doctor for a checkup. And to be honest and open about what you're doing with alcohol and drugs. Tell your doctor. And what you're doing may not be a problem. 90% of the people in the world can drink normally, and it's a wonderful part of their life, but there is a certain percentage that the alcohol is processed differently, and it's just not possible to use it. If you're using a drug, we've so-called legalized marijuana in Colorado, so it's no longer illegal. And alcohol has been legal, but just because they're legal does not mean that they're not possibly a problem. And to my mind, the people to talk with about that is the doctor. Medical care is available to everyone in our society today. If you go into an emergency room and say, I'm really needing some help, nobody's going to be turned down. No one dies of appendicitis anymore. Now, what's going to happen? The Supreme Court's making a ruling. We'll see what happens in the future, but that's definitely the way that it is right now. But I would suggest you give meditation a try. Google how to meditate, see what comes up, pick some approach out that appeals to you. This little book is very powerful, Christian Meditation, and it's based on the work of John Main, who I talked about earlier. And this is spreading very quickly, and they encourage these little independent groups to spring up and meet together once a week to kind of check in with each other. In TM, there is kind of the caste system, and the people that have been initiated and have been around teach the newcomers. The John Main's group is more egalitarian. I think everybody that shows up kind of shares their own take. What they have in common is a Christian belief for the most part, although sometimes it's the cosmic Christ that is not necessarily, they're not doctrinaire necessarily, but they have some sort of a belief. At least they're not on the attack against Christianity. And then if you just have a real objection, a hard time thinking about any kind of even 12-step programs, concept of a higher power, you might look into Herbert Benson, the relaxation response, and he's written other things since then. Has a center in UCLA, has a mindfulness center now, and one of their students who's graduated on, I think she's having a baby now, has kind of gone to the sideline, but she's talked about meditation and recovery from ADHD, group using this meditation approach that she has in her book is forming here in Denver. If you're interested in that, let me know. If, all they'll have in common is a medical diagnosis of ADHD. And we think other groups like that can possibly be forming and be using meditation and the 12 steps. A wonderful book is Breathing Underwater. Richard Rohr has written this book, Breathing Underwater, to look at the 12 steps and their universal application to all people. The assumption in the book is that we're all addicted to something. I mean, there's alcoholism. It's a little different than just an addiction, but alcoholism and addiction. And as far as the 12 steps, he makes the case that we're all addicted to something. Could be workaholism, could be overeating, but a powerful antidote is the 12 steps. And there are a lot of programs that have sprung up structured around the 12 steps. For overeaters, there's Overeaters Anonymous. For gamblers, there's Gamblers Anonymous, and on and on. But, what we're going to experiment with is the idea that maybe, they have designer drugs. Well, this is a designer 12-step group that we're going to look for people that have some sort of a particular problem. We're going to try it with ADHD here in Denver first. So we'll let you know how that goes. And now, a lot of the practitioners that coach ADHD say, well, it's not a disease. It's different than the alcoholism. And that's right. An addiction is not a disease. That's why AA is so careful to say, well, we're not an addiction. And but I think whether it's alcoholism or an addiction to anything at all, the 12 steps are a powerful spiritual path for reconnecting and enabling. One way to look at it is that they are a way to enable us to begin a meditation practice. Because if we haven't cleared away the wreckage of the past, it's very difficult to navigate and to sit there for 20 minutes and to meditate and not have our mind filled with these resentments from the past. Well, we're coming to the end of our half hour together. We're here each Friday morning. If you've started a successful business, we would really like to have you on the program. And if you'd be willing to be on and talk about how you got the idea and how you got to your first sale, we'd love to have you. There's a lot of misinformation about startup. Some of the worst is perpetrated on unsuspecting people. It's tax funded. The Small Business Administration pushes this concept of startup that was first formulated in 1953, that you need to do a lot of market research, that you need to do a lot of very careful formal planning. And that is just not the way successful businesses have ever started in this country. If that worked, we would have a planned economy and not the market economy that we do today. And maybe that's why some people push it, is because they really would prefer to get away from this great, wonderful economic system that's given us more good for more people. The poor are better off today than they ever have been in the history of the world. Now, they can be better, but to just throw out the whole system because there are a few crooks, let's prosecute the crooks, not change the economic system. And but this SBA has done a lot of damage. It should be just shut down, in my opinion. And now maybe there is a need for this safety net, especially in disasters. The SBA goes in and works with FEMA and tries to get businesses back on their feet. Maybe that's a good role for them. But startup from the SBA is like going to, to a cathedral to learn how to shovel garbage or something like that. It just doesn't fit. And I'm here from the government and I'm here to help you. You need to always be a little bit leery about that, in my opinion. And they've done a lot of harm to a lot of people. And I think there needs to be sort of a careful investigation done of them. And if you've got any questions about that, I would love to talk to you. And call me anytime if you would like help. If you're starting, sometimes just talking to someone that's a bit encouraging is the most helpful thing you can do. Call me anytime. There's no charge for phone calls. And I rarely do consulting anymore. I'm spending most of my time trying to get this whatever it is off the ground that I'm hoping will spread virally and actually have a big impact on not only business but politics in this country. The grassroots business and political system that's made this country great over the last 235 years. And we're getting away from it, becoming this big bureaucracy where there's not a whole lot of difference between these large global corporations and government, except the corporations have no boundaries. In some ways, they're even less accountable. Now, it's true that it could be worse. They do have customers. They've got to derive revenue. But I see this lack of vitality, lack of dynamism that Edmund Phelps talks about in his book called Mass Flourishing. He thinks we've really kind of dropped off the cliff. And I think it's clear where that's come from. It's this feeling that of leeriness people have that, you know, I don't think I can do it. And you go into an SBA office and they underscore that. Why do you think you could make it? Why? They're very disencouraging. Now, there are exceptions, and sometimes there's good counselors, but overall, it's a program that needs to be cut out. And maybe we'll talk more about that next week. And but we're trying to replace it with some sort of a virtual group that will encourage people like you to get together with their friends. Google how to start a Franklin Circle. Give it a try. If you get stuck, call me. I have a little book on startup. Google John Wren, Daring Mighty Things. It'll come up. It's 99 cents on Amazon. And I'll tell you what, if you buy it and you don't find it helpful, I'll give you $1 back if you'll give me a call. And the book, though, that I really recommend is Just Start, Harvard Business Review Press. And if you couple it with this idea of recovery, getting back on your feet, I think you're going to have some real success. Take your idea, get customers. What do you have to do to start a business? My friend John Brackney, he says you have to get a customer, and that's absolutely right. Maybe we'll talk about that more next week. If you'd like to be on the show, give me a call, 303-861-1447. In the meantime, this is John Wren, the Startup Show, reminding you this life is very short, so let's go get started.